Hello everybody and welcome back to the Polygon Count podcast. My name is Ross, his name is James, and we are here to talk about video games. Now James, this week is a big week. If you're in America, both the new consoles are out. The new generation has arrived. If you are in the UK, as we are, half of the new generation has arrived. The Xbox came out last week. PS5, of course, launches this week. First things first, A, of course, how are you? And B, have you invested in the new generation yet?
I'm pretty good, thank you. I haven't invested in either of the consoles. I'm still holding to my deluded dream of the limited edition versions, at least of the Xbox and maybe the PlayStation. So no, I've been looking through windows at other people with their new consoles, just stroking the window, going, maybe one day you'll be mine. Not as creepy as that, normally. Do it with a smile.
I mean, if you are interested in James's rationalization for holding out for a unique version of the Xbox or PlayStation, then I highly recommend his article, which you can find on his blog. But from a purely WTF standpoint, what exactly are you holding out for? What kind of unique console are you looking out for? Is there a particular series that you're waiting for? Because I'm worried that you may be waiting the entire generation for like a Viva Pinata Xbox or something.
That is what I want. I actually do want that. That would be fucking amazing. Maybe if, like, when you turn it on, it makes the noise of the pinatas explode. No, I honestly don't know. And when I finished writing the article, I was like, wait, what am I waiting for? I think it's I want a Halo one, because I love Halo. It was the one that really, the first games that Halo 3 was the first game I got for my 360, or one of the first ones I got for my 360, and I fell in love with it. And so I'd love like a cool, like, Spartan green or Master Chief green Xbox maybe. But then I also came up to the realization a few months ago, or maybe a year ago, that I'm not actually that big of a fan of Halo. I mean, I really love Halo 3. I really love Halo 3 ODST, and I like Halo Wars, and they're all made in a very specific time period. The rest of them, I could take them, or I could leave them. So I don't know. I don't know why I'm waiting for that, really. But
so you're holding out for a special edition of a game you're not, or a series you're not even that fussed about.
Yes, and I'm not crazy.
Good.
And for the PlayStation, there's so many games that I could wait for. I mean, probably it'd be a Final Fantasy one or a God of War one, just because they'll probably be the most likely and the most soon into the generation. But then again, I'm not married to the idea. I just want one that looks a bit different, and I don't know why.
You want to be special. You want to be that kid that's got the unique and cool Xbox and the unique and cool PS5.
Exactly. I want to go to the playground. An adult playground, and say, look what I've got.
Carrying it with you over your shoulder.
Yeah.
Like a big game hunter with a deer on the front of your car.
That is the dream I live for. But we'll wait and see, and if I ever actually do get one.
Well, yeah. Well, that's my worry, but I'm sure you'll get there eventually. So, today's podcast, in honor of the launch of the new generation, we thought it'd be fun to look back on our personal picks for some of our games of the previous generation. So just before we get into this, we should obviously lay out some obvious caveats. There have been some phenomenal games in the past generation of gaming. We're only picking our top five, or our, five that we think deserve a prolonged mention, but there are dozens that we're not going to be mentioning here. Dota 2 didn't make it to either of our lists. There was no VR game on either of our lists. There's no Rocket League. So there's some big games and some big series here that don't make the cut, but it's not because that we don't like them or we don't think they're good enough. It's just because we only had five that we have the time to talk about. So that's the first one, and the obvious second one is the cutoff point. So we are looking at games from the PS4 and the Xbox One generation, but it's also only fair to talk about the Switch as well, since that came out as well over the course of the lifespan of the PS4 and the Xbox One. So we are going from 2013 until 2020 as our brackets for this generation, because obviously you could argue that the Switch is maybe fits in more with the latest generation, with the Series X and the PS5, than it does with the PS4 and the Xbox One. You could make that argument, but we're not going to. So
yeah, Nintendo kind of run their own rules, really. They kind of just do what they want now. They're just like,
I was thinking about this the other day. You could probably argue that the Wii U was more PS4 and Xbox One than the Switch, but piss all came out on the Wii U, aside from a game that was a lot better on the Switch. So let's discount the Wii U. Our brackets are 2013 to 2020. Those are the cutoff points. Please don't get upset if we don't mention your favourite game from the previous generation. So, James, we have 5 picks each. I would like to start off, if I may, not necessarily because I'm really excited to start off, but because I don't want to be the last one, because I think your favourite game from the generation is a better talking point. So, I would like.
Best game.
Well, we'll get to that. Hold your horses. I'd like to begin with Overwatch. Now, Overwatch is a game that I didn't play a lot of. I played a bit of it because it was such a huge sensation in 2016 when it came out that you couldn't avoid it. But realistically speaking, the hero shooter genre isn't really for me. I played a lot of Team Fortress 2 when that was big at the back end of the 2010s, or the noughties, not the 2010s. And that was my early interaction with that kind of genre. But the launch of Overwatch kind of just passed me by. It wasn't anything that grabbed me immediately, but everyone was playing it when it originally came out. It had 40 million players at its peak, which is a staggering number. But the reason I've mainly chosen it as one of my games of the generation, despite not being its biggest fan, are 2 reasons, basically. The first is the push into esports. Now, esports is one of the big success stories from this previous generation of games, and it legitimised esports in the eyes of a lot of people who kind of thought that it never would sit on the same status as, other forms of large entertainment industries. But the obvious second reason, and the unfortunate second reason, is that it basically introduced the idea of loot crates and microtransactions that permeated across most of the generation. And admittedly, Overwatch had a huge peak of success in 2016, 2017, which has diminished greatly in the last few years, especially with PUBG and with Fortnite coming along. And Fortnite is going to be the big game that will carry us over into the PS5 and the Xbox Series X generation. But Overwatch is where it all really started. I don't think without Overwatch that Fortnite and PUBG would have been as much of a success as they were. And I don't know the full ins and outs of how long Fortnite was in development for, but I'd be surprised if Fortnite was something that they were planning before they saw the success of Overwatch. But then certainly some of the loot crates and the microtransactions that this game really established. I mean, we've seen so many other games try and capitalize on that as well. Even as far down as stuff like Crash Team Racing Nitro Fueled, which had its own shop in it and had its own things you could buy with your actual real life money, and all these things you had to unlock by coming online every day and playing every day. And I know we'll talk about a game later on that also kind of established that sort of live service element to games. But I think the impact of Overwatch is tragically not for the best, although esports is certainly one of the biggest success stories from Overwatch's release. But I don't think that the future of gaming is ever going to be the same because of some of the things that Overwatch established when it released in 2016. So I think you had a bit more experience with Overwatch than I did. So for a start, do you agree with my reasoning for its position on my list as one of the games of the generation? And B, what was your interaction with Overwatch in this generation?
100% agree with it. I mean, it could equally have been on my list, and it was one of the ones that I hotly contemplated putting on there. Because I absolutely adored Overwatch. I racked up so many hours when it came out, especially the first year or so. I played it relentlessly. I was on ranked matches and I can't remember what season I gave up on. I think it was like 10 or something. So I've played it a crazy amount, and I've even got the pop vinyls from it. I even got a signed pop vinyl of Mercy when I met her at Comic-Con, and I was just so in love with Overwatch, and I completely agree that it is one of the games of the generation because with the loot boxes, it's not a great thing, but it has helped to introduce a whole new concept of free to play, which are more higher quality types of games. I mean, you look at Fortnite being the whole free to play aspect because it's got the loot boxes, and then the whole season pass thing, which it kind of made its own thing, and then other games have replicated. But the whole sense of loot boxes being used to as a way to bring money in as a constant stream, it goes down to sort of Overwatch and making it such a popular thing. But no, I absolutely adored Overwatch. I think it's an incredible game, and I haven't actually had any experience with those kinds of those types of team-based shooters. I mean, I never played Team Fortress 2, and it was. I mean, the reason I actually bought the game was just off just a whim, just because I saw some pictures and I was like, holy crap, that looks cool. And then I fell in love with it, and I think it's such a great way at making those sort of especially like for esports sort of games, they makes it more welcoming to newcomers, because it is a lot easier to get the hang of. I mean, everything's got unique skill sets, and everyone can just pick up and have one that they can play as. You can pick a tracer and you can go around and run and shoot. Or if you actually want to be more of like the traditional Call of Duty shooter, you can go and you can play as Soldier 76, and it's something that you're aware of, and so that can help you get into that more competitive scene. Because I mean, ranked matches are pretty scary in any kind of game, especially ones like Overwatch and that sort of ilk. So I think it's a great game, and I think that what they did with their story, like they didn't even have a story, but they managed to build up such an incredible lore and world around it, which not many other games have really done in the same way. Because you got the characters, but there's no scenes in it, so you can't really build it up. And so they built up the story outside through like the little animation shorts and the comics. And I thought it was a really cool way to build up the lore of a game by making people go to external sources, which is one of the game on my list did, but not as well, because I didn't really enjoy it. Whereas watching the videos, I think it was just such a cool way to get lore around and make you feel about characters, where in the actual game they don't do much.
I mean, I think I appreciate this is one of the big selling points of hero shooters as a whole, but I think the thing that really appealed to me with Overwatch, even though it didn't connect with me as a genre, was just the vast array of characters. And like you say there about the pot vinyls and the collectibles, I mean, my sister was desperate for Mercy statues and Tracer statues. She was a big fan of this game. I know so many people that invested in the pot vinyls and cosplayed as some of these characters. It was so enormously distinctive. I mean, even though I don't know many of the characters on that roster, I still see pictures of cosplays like on Instagram or Reddit, and I can instantly say, oh, that's from Overwatch. It's almost a disappointment that it's not as popular as it once was, that it's been overtaken by things like Fortnite and PUBG, because I think it had a lot more merit, personally, than stuff like Fortnite does. But ultimately, I think its legacy is, unfortunately, going to be for the negative. When I was actually putting this list together, I very nearly put Star Wars Battlefront 2 on this list, as an example of how badly you can judge the loot crate and microtransaction market. Because obviously that one led to entire countries turning around and saying that we need to try and find a way to regulate loot crates and microtransactions. So I almost put Star Wars Battlefront on there, but at the end of the day, this is basically where it started. And I think as much joy as Overwatch has brought to so many people, it does have a lot to answer for, and it's still going to have a lot to answer for as we go into the next generation. Because unfortunately, I think it's established something that a lot of very clever game designers are going to be milking for a very long time, which is if you can just tap into that characterful bent of a video game and find some way to make it a pick up and play addictive experience, like in the same way with Fortnite. As you say, it's free to play. You can pick up and play it with anyone straight off the bat. But then you just slip in those insidious microtransactions and those loot crates, and you just keep people coming back and spending money. You can create a dynasty that will last you a number of years, but will also make a lot of money. So I have a lot of time for what Overwatch did in many regards, but unfortunately I think its legacy, for me at least, is going to be cloudy at best. And I think Overwatch is just the tip of the iceberg as we go into this next generation of games that are just basically designed to milk you of all the money they can.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's good that you mentioned Star Wars, because like Overwatch sort of started the trend, but then Star Wars managed to do it so badly that we actually brought some regulation into it, so that it couldn't just go off, which was obviously a great way. And now you've got countries at the is it the Netherlands or Denmark? Which I think
Belgium's one, but I wouldn't be surprised if the Netherlands is also one. But Belgium rings a bell.
Yeah, well, I mean, Overwatch is actually the only game where I have bought loot boxes.
There you go.
Because I absolutely loved it, and I just needed it. And so yeah, that's my only ever interaction, which just probably shows you how great they were at building characters up. Because yeah, I felt like they're cosmetic, but I was like, I need these. So
I mean, the only other thing I can give Overwatch credit for, while I think about it, is breaking up the endless cycle of Call of Duty Battlefield, Call of Duty Battlefield, Call of Duty Battlefield. It was nice for at least a while to have a hero shooter that was just different from the recycled grey and green palettes of the Call of Duty and Battlefield series. So I don't want to look like I'm crapping on Overwatch, because it is a fantastic game. But at the end of the day, when I step back and look at it objectively, I think the legacy that Overwatch is going to leave is going to be historically negative when we look at 50 years' time, when you look back on the track record of loot crates and microtransactions. It's all started with Overwatch, and I don't think it's a legacy that Blizzard should be proud of, although the game certainly is.
Well, it makes you wonder, because obviously Overwatch 2's going to come out soon, whenever that does come out. So it'd be interesting if it does renew that hype and that excitement for it, or if it just becomes like it's Overwatch 2. And I think it might be the second. I don't think it'll be able to generate as much hype and excitement as that first one did, because it was really so fresh and it was just bringing so much new to the gaming world.
Yeah, it's kind of a very tough time up against Fortnite at this point. But hey, I think Overwatch has still got a lot of potential in it. But the original, I will never be able to divorce my disapproval of loot crates and microtransactions from, unfortunately. So that was my first entry in my collection of games of the generation. James, we're now going to move over to you. And I know that your first pick is one that I also thought about putting on this list until I realised it was going to be on yours. Mario Odyssey. Can you talk us through why you chose Super Mario Odyssey?
Okay, yeah. So this is probably my most my wild card-esque one, and it was the one that I had the most questioning of if I put it in or not. But to me, Mario Odyssey just surmises gaming as itself. I mean, if you think a video game, I think, a video game in 2020, Mario Odyssey is what you would traditionally just think of going, oh, that's a video game. Yeah, or if you go back to the 80s and go, what do you reckon a video game in the future is going to be like? I think Mario Odyssey would be that thing. I mean, it's just such a wonderfully made video game that feels like a game, and it just plays so perfectly. It's got those quirky gimmicks. It's got, the storyline's not perfect, but it's still a fun, enjoyable adventure that you can go on with anyone. I mean, it's a real family affair. You can play with everyone. I just think that's what is just so good. I mean, we get a lot of the industries become, I'm not going to hate and go, it's come a lot more, big and, trying to impact everything and become more thought provoking, like your Last of Us, where it's like, we're going to make commentaries of civilization and stuff, which is great. And I think that's perfect. But I also want some games that just feel like games. And I think that Mario Odyssey just, brings that so perfectly. I mean, as with many Nintendo games, they released a high standard. I just think it's just like a whimsical adventure that's just enjoyable for everyone. Everyone's going to enjoy this game. Everyone's going to pick it up, play it, and go, "Oh, it's Mario." You know what you're going to get, but then they've added some twists, and that's why I personally think that it just deserved to be in it, because I just think it's a game. It's not you're breaking barriers. It's not doing anything. It's revolutionary. It's just a very good game, which is modern, and it has everything that you would want from a video game.
Yeah, I completely agree. The one thing I thought of when you said that you were going to go with Super Mario Odyssey is just that every Nintendo console, with a couple of exceptions, has always had a defining Mario experience on it. Like a game that defines that generation, a game that stands head and shoulders above everything else that Nintendo do that generation. You can go back to, the original Mario. You can go back to Super Mario 3D World, or 3D Land, I can't remember which one it is now, but the one that was on the DS. You can go back to Super Mario Galaxy, Super Mario Sunshine. There's always a big Mario release to mark the release of a new Nintendo console. And Super Mario Odyssey obviously had a lot to live up to, because the Switch was such a huge change for video games. It wasn't just a Nintendo handheld, it was also a Nintendo home console. It could be used in so many different ways in a comparison to a PS4 or an Xbox One. This was a game that had to do a lot. It had to carry a brand new console. It also had to live up to the standards of so many other previous Mario titles that had launched with their consoles or defined their consoles. But it also had to show off all the new shit that the Switch could do. In the same way that Mario Galaxy is still using the Wii Motion, and it does it really well as a kind of a tech demonstration of what you can expect from this entire generation of games on this system. And a Mario game for me is always that kind of litmus test of how good is this console going to be? What can it do? What can it achieve? And I thought Super Mario Odyssey not only knocked it out the park, but I think it set a real high bar for the kind of games we could expect on the Switch. As a long-time Pokemon fan, when I heard that Sword and Shield were going to be on this console, I thought, wow, think of what they've done for Mario for the Mario series. I know as a kind of on-off Kirby fan, I thought, wow, think of what they could do with the Kirby franchise now it's on the Switch. I don't think the Kirby franchise or the Pokemon franchise have met those standards. That's not to say the games they released were bad, but for me, because Mario set the bar so high when the Switch released, it's like you say, it's a damn near perfect game if you look at it objectively. For my money, there's way too many bloody moons in it to collect. But by the by, there's so much to do, so many varied places. I mean, we can all remember that scene in New Donk City with the festival. It's such a distinctive, memorable Switch game. It's such a big launch title for the Switch. Personally, I think one of the greatest launch titles for any console ever. It set the bar so high with the Switch that even franchises like Pokemon and Kirby and God knows who else I can mention, who are all going to be releasing games on this console, all of their fans are going to be thinking, well, remember what Super Mario Odyssey did for the Mario franchise, and a game we'll get to a bit later as well. I think you're bang on to put it on this list. It's not going to have the same kind of cultural impact as some of the other ones that we're discussing. It's not going to shape the games industry in the same way that Overwatch has. But it's for me the first game I think of when I think of this previous generation. It was just such a big release, and such a big release for the Switch in particular.
No, yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I've had a weird history with Mario. I mean, I don't hate Mario games, but I've never really fallen in love with them, bar, a handful of ones like Mario Sunshine I adored, and Super Mario World 2. But then like Galaxy, I just wasn't that into it. I was just like, I mean, this is a bit boring after a while. But I think Odyssey was just so well made, and it was so beautiful, and yeah, it just showed you the capabilities, as you said, of the Switch and what you're going to expect. And whenever I think back to the games that I've played on the Switch, there's the two games that I always think of, and it's that one, and then obviously the other one we keep teasing it, the other one that's on my list.
The worst kept secret of this entire podcast is the game that James will be discussing at the very end of it. Yes. It's one of the ones that I always think about, and I just think it's such a wonderfully fun adventure where you can just play it for as long as you want, and you're going to enjoy it. And it did things that you didn't expect. I mean, never had I thought, wait, hold on a minute, what happens if I could control these monsters and see them with cute little mustaches? I mean, I never thought of that, and then when it had done it, I was like, oh my god, why has this not been in everything? This is a wonderful game, and I was genuinely sad to finish it. And I mean, that rarely happens, well, not rarely happens, but it's a rarer thing to happen when you get to the end of the game. You're like, I want more. Normally it's like, okay, I think that was a good place to end it. Whereas Mario Odyssey, I was like, I want more. I think it's got so much more I want to play. The very last thing I wanted from Mario was more. The sheer amount of moons in that thing to collect. But I understand what you mean. I do understand what you mean. It's just such a good game that you could play it again, but you don't want to play it again. You want something brand new and fresh that's as good as this. I understand what you mean. It's intoxicatingly good. And like I say, it feels like every generation has to have a defining Mario game on it. Every console has to have a defining Mario game on it. And I would completely agree with you that Super Mario Odyssey absolutely nailed it on the Switch right out of the gate. And it just set such a high standard for this console that no matter how bad they bungle the rest of the Switch's lifespan, it will always have a handful of its launch titles, including Super Mario Odyssey. So let's move on to my next pick for Game of the Generation. And I feel a little guilty about putting this one on here since it's not actually a console game, but I couldn't bring myself to avoid it. It's, of course, Pokemon Go. So Pokemon Go, I mean, there's no one in the world, surely, that's not played Pokemon Go. When it came out in 2016, it was everywhere. It even made it onto BBC News broadcasts. Norwegian politicians were getting caught playing it at hearings and such. It was everywhere. And look, you can talk to me for hours about whether or not I think it's had a positive effect on the Pokemon franchise going forward. For my money, I think it's dumbed down the Pokemon franchise more than the Pokemon franchise was already dumbing down, because this game exploded in a way that no one could have predicted. Suddenly, Niantic and the Pokemon Company were faced with literally millions of players that have never picked up a Pokemon game before, or haven't picked up a Pokemon game since the original generations with Blue, Red and Yellow. and suddenly they saw an enormous untapped market that they could try and get to buy a Switch, to buy a mainline entry, to invest in this series financially for the long term. It's a game that has completely changed the way that the Pokemon Company has made games in the last couple of years. It was responsible for Let's Go Pikachu and Let's Go Eevee. I'm certain that they dumbed down Sword and Shield as much as they did because they wanted to try and get Pokemon Go fans who maybe picked up Let's Go Pikachu or Let's Go Eevee to then invest in a mainline series. You know, Meltan was released on Pokemon Go, and even today you can only get Meltan through Pokemon Go. It's clearly a series that did so well that it's now influencing the rest of the Pokemon franchise and will going forward. You can decide for yourself whether that's a good or a bad thing. For me, it's not. I think it's a very bad thing for the Pokemon franchise. But I can understand why. They're going where the numbers are, and this year alone, I think they made over $1 billion this year from Pokemon Go. And to think that this is the same year with a global pandemic that's keeping everyone indoors, for a game that, you know, if you look at the comments section of any Pokemon Go tweet, people are always saying it's a dead game, it died out in 2016, it lasted 3 months, no one's playing it. Well, the stats say something completely different. It's somewhere between 50 to 100 million people still playing it today, depending on who you believe. And like I say, $1 billion made in a year when no one could go outside. This is a game that I mean, for me personally, it's a game that I'll never forget because I'm still playing it today. But for a lot of other people, like the man on the street, as it were, it will be one of those things that you fondly remember in 5 years' time. In the same way that a couple of days ago, I fondly remembered that time where the sky over the UK went orange because of that Saharan dust that was blown across the UK in 2017 because of a storm in America. It's one of those things that I'll remember and go, oh yeah, I remember living through that. People are going to remember that with Pokemon Go as well. So I know you are also a Pokemon Go player still. You and I quite regularly go and play Pokemon Go when we are actually allowed to see each other face to face. I dare say that you can't really find a way to play devil's advocate because although, like I say, it's a mobile game, I think it's incredibly hard to argue that this wasn't one of the defining experiences of this generation.
No, yeah, I agree. How much I would want to say no, but no, I do agree. It's been crazy, and it's just as you said, I still play it, and I think it's such a cool thing when I'm walking down the street and I see someone else playing it. I have that instant connection. I'm like, oh my god, you're playing Pokemon Go. I don't talk to them because I'm not weird, but I'm like, oh, that's so sweet, and have like that sort of connection thing. But it's been such a crazy few years, and you know, I get to those points where I'm like, oh, I'm gonna stop playing this now because I think it's run its course. I mean, what, after 4 years? But then I just still play it because there's something so addicting about it. I mean, just trying to catch them all, or their shiny versions, and it just keeps people playing it. And I just think it's not even the people that you'd expect still playing it. I mean, we played it during that Reggie Gigas event, and there was that lady there who must have been in her 50s, and she'd never played Pokemon whatsoever. And she called them animals, and she was like, "Oh, there's another one of these animals. Gotta catch them." And she was still loving it and still having a whale of a time, and she had been playing it since it had released. And it's just such a game that's brought people who wouldn't have played Pokemon or haven't even played games before, and they just got involved in it because it was just such a fun way of just getting your exercise. And I think it's such a cool thing to have done, making gamers go outside into the real world and explore. I mean, not to go into the stereotypes going, they don't like to go outside, but I mean, it is just a cool thing, and it gets me out more because I'm like, oh, actually, yeah, I'll go out for a walk to quickly catch some stuff, or I've got an egg to hatch, so yeah, I'll go out for a walk. So no, I think it's done so much, and yeah,
I think one thing for me as well. The big thing for me is just the memories that Pokemon Go's created. Like I say, the time we did the Reggie Gigas event in the sleeting rain and the horrific wind, or that time we were in London and we were trying to do the Groudon and Kyogre raids, for example, or I remember certain shinies that I've caught, or the time you got a shiny Magikarp on the very first Pokemon you clicked on when you came to visit me in Reading for the first time. I've got all these little Pokemon Go memories that I've made and faces that I remember through Pokemon Go. I think it's just one of the most connected games I've ever played. It's one of the most community feeling games I've ever played, and for it to be a Pokemon game as well, to me is especially special. But I mean, like I say, the numbers just don't lie. $1 billion made this year, somewhere between 50 and 100 million people still playing it. it's just such a juggernaut. Even if a lot of people are now quite cynical about the fact it's a dead game, etc. I don't think you can dispute its position as one of the most impactful games of the last generation.
No, yeah. I mean, so many games would kill for those kind of revenues in just 1 year, let alone after 4. But no, I completely agree about like some of the, as you said about that Magikarp, which is one of my best, one of my fondest memories from like video games, just because it was just such a spur of the moment luck where I was just like, oh wow, I got shiny, and then you tried to click it and it wasn't. And then when I've had other shinies, like when I got my shiny Roselia, I can still remember the moment that I got it, because it was just such a cool thing. And there's you try and you remember bits from games, but one that you play so much, and it's just those bits stand out, and I'll never forget those times that I caught it. But one of the things is, as you mentioned, was the community building, and I've seen so many people who have just built up friendships because they've played Pokemon Go, and when we've been around in tours at Brighton, and we've tagged onto a raid, and then the people there are talking to each other, and they've met each other via Pokemon Go, and they keep up with each other and they talk now, and it would never have happened if it wasn't for Pokemon Go. And I mean, obviously there's games that bring people together, but there's not many that actually bring together in the same kind of way. And Pokemon Go has just been Pokemon Go's just been such a great way of just building connections with people who might have been secluded before. Maybe they didn't have many friends, and or they didn't really connect with many people. But this has given them a way to connect with people who've got similar interests, and they can get out and meet them physically rather than just being stuck at home and not being able to speak to anyone.
Yeah, I think it's for all the criticism you can lay at Niantic's door for some of the things they've done with Pokemon Go over its lifespan, I think it's difficult to make a case against it, despite what some people may think of its legacy. But we've gone on for quite a while there on Pokemon Go. Thankfully, I do not have a lot to say about the one that you're about to raise now, so I'm going to let you explain why you have chosen God of War / God of War 4, depending on how you wish to categorise it, as your next game of the generation.
So the reason that I think it is just because it's such a well crafted story, and I just think that it's such a nice, sweet, down to earth-esque story, if you can call one about gods down to earth. But I just think it's such a sweet thing, and you've got the story about these big, powerful gods. But the stuff they're going through is just so human, and you can relate with Kratos. I mean, if you've got a kid, you could probably relate more than what I could. But there's just that connection, and the way that you go through their whole relationship together, and you start to feel connections, and you want Kratos to be better, and you're like, oh, go on, just do that. That'd be nice, wouldn't it? Just help that. And it's just such a sweet thing to see him develop over the game, which I just don't think it was a similar thing that had been done by games before that. And I remember I read an interesting theory on this, and why you had games like God of War and Last of Us and similar, that sort of thing, where it's like a parent and child going around, is because a lot of the people who were making the games, playing the games when they were kids, are now growing up, and they're making games, and now they've got families. So while before they were making games which were fun, that they want to play, and it's exciting, now they've got a family, and so now they're putting them experiences into the games that they make. And I just think that's such I would like to see more of that sort of stuff, because I think there's so much more that can be done in that sort of relationship between like a parent and a child, or like an adult and a child. And I just think that it's just such a wonderfully crafted story, and I wish I could have put the original Last of Us in here, but I mean, obviously that was technically came out at the end of the last generation, so unfortunately I couldn't, because I think that's also got a very good storyline. That's got one of the best stories I've played. But I think God of War also just has the way that it just hid loading screens. And I mean, games have not had the best reputation with loading screens. I mean, look at some of the games that take like 2 minutes to load, like GTA 5 takes like 2 minutes to load, which is just ridiculous. But the fact that God of War just made it all seamless, and they hide the loading screens tactfully, so that you don't go, cool, I'll just sit there and wait. It's all integrated and all interwoven, so you just feel like it's a perfect cinematic scene, and everything just feels so cinematic, and you're actually like, you're removed from the aspect of it's a game. You're brought into it, and you're like, wow, this is just a story. I'm going to get engrossed completely. And I just think that it's everything. It feels very much like a cinematic blockbuster, in the way that it's been made and it's created. The story's perfect. The scenes that it does, the way that it transitions from like a scene to combat is just done so smoothly and so gracefully that it just feels like a truly spectacle, and it feels like it's a proper defining next gen, or not next gen anymore, but game experience where it's just so perfectly created.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to find it difficult to provide too much analysis on your selection of God of War because I haven't played it. So I have played the original trilogy across the PS2 and the PS3, or the remastered version of God of War 3 on the PS4. And what I loved about God of War the most was just the sheer brutality and the hack and slash madness of it all. I liked the fact that Kratos was just a bloodthirsty maniac who sometimes had very questionable motives in what he was doing and who he was attacking. And obviously the new God of War 4, however you want to preface it, this God of War has reinvented the franchise slightly. It has made it more personal. It has tried to humanize Kratos. It has tried to give him a more relatable story to tell. And like I say, I haven't played it yet. My hope is that when the PS5 comes out, the first two games I'm going to be playing are Bugsnax and Astro's Playroom, and then the next one I'm hoping to play is God of War. So hopefully soon I'll be in a position to render a proper opinion on it. But I can't, from what I know of it, I can't deny its place on your list. I can't make an argument against it. I could tell you what I don't necessarily like about it from the distance I'm sitting at, and what I think I'm going to struggle with when I do get around to playing it. But in terms of its impact on the generation, I can't pretend that it's not one of the first games I think of when I think of the PS4, along with stuff like The Last of Us 2. And a game that we'll be talking about in a bit. Well, a couple of games we'll be talking about in a bit. But for me, God of War is one of those games that a lot of people would have gone out of their way to buy the console for. And if that's not an indication of a game that defined the generation, then I don't know what is. So that's about right now the maximum I can give in terms of interpretations of God of War. I don't necessarily know how I'm going to feel about it when I finally play it. Hopefully, you're right about the story and it does appeal to me, and I change my tune on it. But I certainly can't deny that it's, even for someone who hasn't played it, when I think of the PS4, I think of the front cover of the PS4 box art for God of War 4. And I already know some of the scenes from it are going to be incredibly distinctive, like when he first meets Jormungandr, the World Serpent. So, yeah, I like I say, this is probably the maximum that I can do in terms of analysis on God of War, but I certainly can't deny its place here, even if I think it's probably going to have gone a different direction for my liking.
Yeah, well, I'd never played the original God of War trilogy, and this one was my first taster of the whole world. And so I was coming at it from a completely fresh angle, and I was considering like, oh, I'm really going to get that much out of it. But just instantly, I felt a connection with the whole story and Kratos, and I already knew obviously what he does in the original trilogy, and so I could get that sense of his background and where he's coming from and all that sort of stuff. And it's just such a character development, well crafted character development, where you can just play it and everything's been just, you can see it, and it really does well at making you feel for the characters and changing opinions on characters, and gives you like plot twists that you might not see coming, but then it gives you hints to it throughout the game. And it's so, I just think, yeah, and the combat was perfect. I mean, it's so fluid, and the Leviathan axe is one of the coolest weapons that's ever been made. The fact that you can throw it and have it bring it back, comes back to you like Mjolnir, Thor's hammer, is such a cool thing. And I hadn't played that sort of style of combat before. I mean, I'd never played any of the Dark Souls style before that, where it's that similar sort of tactical combat, which is a bit trickier, and you might have to go on a bit of the defensive, but just not as difficult, obviously, as what the Soulsborne's games are. I just think it's a wonderfully created game, and I think that when you play it, you're just taken back by its sort of beauty, and just the writing in it is just so perfect in everything they do. They manage to make Kratos come across as he would. There's not a bit where he just breaks character, and same with Atreus. He acts like a kid, and you feel like this is an actual kid who's doing this, not, oh, this is clearly just an adult who's written this. He actually feels like a kid. And then some of the other characters that you meet along the way, are super funny, or then you've got ones that aren't funny and that you hate, or and it's got everything that a movie would have, but in a video game. And I just think that more games should be taking that note where they put story on that like pedestal and make it a more scenic and like cinematic experience.
Well, the next time we sit down to do a podcast, which by our standards will probably be next March, I will hopefully have played God of War 4, and we can have a proper discussion about what I thought about the story and whether I would agree that it's as good in the same ways that you do. But like I say, I can't deny that it's not one of the first games I think of when I think about the PS4. So I can't argue its position on your list. So let's move on to my next entry. Before I announce it, I would like to remind all of you of that Simpsons reference where Homer is sat on the sofa and he's watching something on TV, and they give a product warning, and he says, "See, because of me, now they have a warning." That is the exact reason I have chosen No Man's Sky as my next pick for a game that defined the generation. Now, obviously, the link here is that if you followed any of No Man's Sky's marketing, they pushed this thing so hard. They promised so much. A procedurally generated universe with 18 quintillion or whatever it was planets, that no planet would ever feel alike, that each playthrough would be completely unique, that you could be lost in an ever-growing universe where every planet would have different flora, different fauna, different objectives, different places to go, that it would all look distinctive. And I remember watching some of the marketing when it was originally announced and just thinking, this cannot really be true. Because to produce something like that, to coin a phrase, we did not have the technology at the time to be producing that. We still don't have the technology to be producing a game that large in scope. And yet, still the CEO of the developers, Sean Murray, was everywhere. You know, he was on so many different platforms. He was even on Stephen Colbert's late night talk show in America promoting this game. And I can't remember another game that's had that kind of promotion. He was promoting this everywhere and promising so much. And then, of course, it finally released. And we discovered that it was not even half of what had been promised. I've got a quote here from Sean Murray, who said that he later admitted that Hello Games had failed to control the exaggerated expectations of the game from the media and the large than expected player count at launch. And since Hello Games have taken an approach of remaining quiet about updates until they were nearly ready to ship to avoid miscommunication. Now, I cannot disagree more with this concept that it was the media that was hyping this game to the levels that it was eventually hyped to, because Sean Murray was doing more than his fair share of unfair hype and undue hype for No Man's Sky. Now, obviously, No Man's Sky has gone on to be patched and rebuilt in many different ways, and is a lot closer to the original vision than the original product. But at the end of the day, the reason I'm saying that this is my game, one of my games of the generation, the reason I'm linking it to that Simpsons reference, is because I think this was the moment where a lot of us as gamers changed our minds on games being delayed, where games being delayed became a bit more of the new norm in the games industry, where a release date it no longer felt like it was set in stone and more like it was an aspirational target. We've seen so many games in the last couple of years that have been bumped back and back and back and back. And just off the top of my head, Cyberpunk 2077 has been delayed again recently. Halo Infinite has been delayed. You've got the Final Fantasy VII Remake was delayed. There's dozens and dozens of examples of this. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing at all. Actually, I think it's a very good thing for games not to release in such horrific states. You can look at something like Mass Effect Andromeda, for example, that was a buggy, broken mess when it released, or indeed No Man's Sky. But for me, I think No Man's Sky was such a defining moment of this generation, not only because it's going to be setting the standard for the industry for so many more years, but I think it also changed the way a lot of gamers thought about game delays. And, you know, people are still forgiving Cyberpunk 2077 for their second pushback in their release date. And, you know, Halo pushed their release back, 4-5 months or something in around that figure, 3 to 5 months. And people are okay with it because they don't want it to be like No Man's Sky. They don't want it to be as big a letdown as this game was. So, James, I think you had a bit of history with No Man's Sky and you played it a lot more than I did. I don't know whether you played the original build or if you played the updated versions. But in terms of its impact on the industry, I know there are bigger games. I know I could have put Rocket League or something like that here. But can you understand why I've picked No Man's Sky as one of my games of the generation?
I can. I can understand it. I mean, I wouldn't pick it because I'm like, ugh. But I can understand your reasoning, and it just makes sense. I mean, it has been like a warning sign to sort of other developers not to go in too hard. I mean, I read the Blood, Sweat, and Pixels, which is a phenomenal book, and anyone should read it. I remember in that they followed like the development of Shovel Knight from Yacht Club, and they were saying that. Once they'd finished the game, because they'd raised it on Kickstarter, they had to go back and add more stuff. And that was so time consuming. I think it's something that other game developers have had. And, the idea that once you finish the game, you kind of want to move on after that. But you still having to, go back and add stuff to the game. You might love doing it, but you do want that sort of that freshness to once you finish the game to move on. And I just feel like No Man's Sky had like that thing where it's just like, we're going to have to try and fix it. We can't move on from it because where it is isn't what people wanted. And so I think that, I think No Man's Sky has helped to bring back on that hype, and people are less expecting of, well, I say people are less expecting. I mean, there's a lot of hype for Cyberpunk, as you mentioned, and I feel like it's getting to that point where it might be like a No Man's Sky or like the original Watch Dogs, where people have hyped it up to be so much more, and it might not capitalize on what it suggests. I mean, they announced that you could customize the length of your teeth, which I don't know why I need that in a game. So I don't know. I think, but I do think that No Man's Sky has helped to rein back some of the ambitions of early game developers and or indie developers, and making them not promise the moon and have it more of a stretch goal sort of thing of, if we release it, we'll then add it on afterwards potentially. I played it briefly. I played it on Game Pass actually, so not that long ago. So after it had made all those fixes, and I still just didn't get on with it. It's not my kind of game, I don't think. It's got too much open stuff and not a lot to do per se. I mean, I liked Minecraft as a kid, so maybe if I, when I was younger, if I had come across No Man's Sky as it is now, then maybe I would have more enjoyment in just exploring. But I just think that there wasn't enough content, or there wasn't much of a goal that I needed to just get loose, and I didn't know what. I just didn't get the point of what am I meant to be doing, sort of thing. And it's just the idea you can fly off to another planet, but then what's the point of being on this planet? I mean, you could probably tell me millions of reasons if you've played it and you go, there's these reasons to do it. But just from that initial reaction of when I played it, I just don't see the enjoyment of it. But when it really first started, I was one of the people trying to hold people's expectations back. I'd known people who were like, oh my god, this is going to be phenomenal, and I was trying to tell them, I was like, maybe don't get your hopes up too much, because they're promising the moon, quite literally. And it did become true. I mean, it was just the idea of you've made an online game, but you might not, the chances of you meeting someone are like non-existent. You're never going to meet them. And I was like, then what's the point of having that online game? What's the point of having this incredible universe where you can make your mark, but no one's going to see it? It's just yours. So then what's the point of having 60 trillion million zillion planets if it's pointless? And and obviously it showed that not of the fauna and flora are all very similar, and nothing was very much different, and there was little to do. But I mean, you got credit to them, because they did fix it and they brought it to a standard that people do love. I mean, I might not be its biggest fan, but people do love it, and it still goes along with a fan base today. So yeah, I can respect why it's on there, and yeah, I do think it has warned some people, but not as much as it probably should have. And I think next gen, it might be Cyberpunk, but I think there'll be ones afterwards where it's going to have a similar level of hype, and it's just not going to capitalize. It's not going to learn from history, and it's destined to repeat it.
Yeah, I mean, I think to kind of clarify why I picked it, I think it is a more defining game for the generation for industry professionals than it is for fans, which may be. Which for some people may make it a difficult game to include on this kind of list. Like I say, I could have chosen Rocket League, and I was very close to putting Rocket League on here instead, because as a fan, that game's going to live much longer with me than something like No Man's Sky did. But in terms of the industry, I think the impact that No Man's Sky's release cycle, its marketing, had the lessons that companies will have had to have learned from No Man's Sky's horrific launch, I think are going to be felt for a very long time. And like you say, maybe Cyberpunk will end up falling into this category, but I think we will continue to see this next generation games being pushed back and pushed back and pushed back because they just don't want to run the risk of a No Man's Sky situation, or because there's others you could point to, like I say, Mass Effect Andromeda, Final Fantasy 14 had a horrendous launch as well. I know that was like 2010 odd, but there's I think this is set an industry standard, and I think it's going to have a major impact as we go into the next generation. So I've just checked the time, and I've realised we are currently running at an hour, and we still have about 5 games left to go. So let's move swiftly on to your next selection, which is Red Dead Redemption 2.
Yes, I know there's a lot of controversy over Red Dead 2, and I know my friends. I mean, some of them loved the first one but don't like the second one. Where I'm the opposite, and I enjoyed the first one, but I didn't really love it. But I absolutely adored the second one. And I think one of the things that makes me love Red Dead 2 so much is the amount of effort that went into it. I mean, there is a lot of effort that went into it, but obviously you can't really mention the effort without saying obviously the terrible conditions that they were forced to work in. And that was a great sort of realization and insight into the industry, and things do need to change. But the fact that they were working so many hours and forced overtime, not getting extra overtime pay, people having their names omitted from credits if they weren't deemed as putting enough effort in, and that sort of stuff, which is a terrible way to make the game, and it does put a sort of a smear on the game. But I think that the game they did make is phenomenal, and I just think that it's a hallmark to the level of detail that games of the current power, and hopefully what the next generation can even improve upon, is just the amount of detail and little bits that you can put into it to make it feel real. I mean, the game, it feels so immersive. It's the most immersive sort of game that I've played, where everything feels like real life. And I mean, I'm not always on board with the whole survival aspect, because it's just like, well, I'm playing a game to play a game. I'm not playing a game to have a real life. But I think that it did it enough to make it feel enjoyable, that you weren't constantly, like in Far Cry 2, having the malaria tablets, which just became annoying. Whereas in Red Dead 2, the survival aspects were very minimal, and they were still there, and they made things better, but it wasn't overbearing. And it's just the small details, like the fact that Arthur gets scars on him and they will stay for a few days and they will start healing, or the fact that Arthur will count the bullets when he's putting them into the revolver, and you can see his mouth moving, but he doesn't say anything, and it's just the mouth movements. Or you can see if on a revolver, if you zoom into the revolver bit, I don't know, I'm not a gun expert, but you can see the bullets that have been shot, which is such a cool detail that no one's going to notice. And there's so many little bits like that, and I'm always finding more and just finding out and going, holy crap, that's phenomenal. Like the amount of fine detail that they put into it. I mean, even one that obviously that everyone's going to come across, the fact that the shops work by having it as like a book, and then you go through the book and everything in it has been done like it's a real functioning world. You could realistically just go into the Red Dead world and live. I mean, as you are, because they've put so much finer details into it that it just is a breathing ecosystem where you feel like, kind of like if it's like an Animal Crossing, where if you feel like if you put Red Dead 2 to turn it off, it's going to still play without you. Things are still going to happen. It's still going to go on because it's just so well made. And I mean, the story has its issues, especially with like some of the gameplay stuff. Maybe a few two missions are just go here, shoot people, because I mean, that's not exactly the greatest level design. I mean, there's one where you have to shoot people because you need a hammer, which isn't the best way to get a hammer. Normally you ask. But I just think that the Arthur is a one. I've sung my praises of Arthur so many times, and I think he's a wonderful character. He's such a troubled hero, where he's like he's a good guy who's had a bad life. Essentially, he if he had been given different cards as a kid, he would have ended up differently. And he's not just a bad guy. Just because he is an outlaw, it doesn't mean that he is actually a bad guy deep down. He does terrible things, but that's just because that's all he's got. And I just think he's a wonderfully made character, and I think he's probably one of the standout characters from the generation. Of just the way that you see him as him, and just like the way that he opens up and stuff, because he's like, starts off as this tough demeanor, and then he breaks down, near the end, and you get to see him for who he is and how he actually acts. And I just think that, yeah, I think Arthur and the small details just make this such a wonderful game, and it just shows the power that games can have now, and what they can, what developers can do, and the sheer scale of what you can make it.
Yeah, I mean, again, this is much like God of War. This is a game I can't provide too much analysis on for my part, because it's a game I've not played. The reason I've not played it, however, is the exact reason that you love it. It's the detail. I am not built for games with this much detail. I am not built for open world experiences. I need things to be far more linear to really enjoy a video game. So for me, Red Dead is just so completely overawing that I don't know if I could ever enjoy any of it. But to look at it objectively, I mean, like you say, it's one of the most immersive, detail-driven games that has ever been made. It puts some of the details that Hideo Kojima would put into original Metal Gear games, where like ice cubes would melt in real time and stuff. It puts some of those details to shame. Like you say, Arthur counting bullets as he puts bullets in the revolvy bit. Just an outsider looking in, I can completely understand why people love this game as much as they do, because you could literally pour thousands of hours into Red Dead. And I know plenty of people that only buy consoles basically so they can play FIFA and Call of Duty that have bought Red Dead as well and swear by Red Dead. It's got a universal appeal in the same way that Grand Theft Auto has a universal appeal, except it's set in a far more interesting, I think, environment than any of the GTAs that have come before it. So for me, I mean, like I say, there's not a lot of analysis I can do on it. I've not played it. I've got absolutely zero desire to play it. But in terms of the thing I hate most about it, which is the detail, it's also the thing to admire most about it. To have managed to cram so much into that game. And like you say, the horrendous working conditions that some of those developers and some of the staff were working under, perhaps that's another reason why it is one of the games of the generation, because it did highlight so many examples of malpractice in the gaming industry. Perhaps it is going to be something that games learn from in the future. But in terms of the final product, everything that I find completely overawing about it is equally what makes it so damn good. And like I said with God of War, although it's not for me, it's another one of those games that I can't look at the PS4 and not picture the front cover of Red Dead. It's going to be one of the iconic games from the PS4 era. And in 10 years' time, when people are doing lists of their favourite games from each generation of, the PlayStation, this is going to top a lot of them. I understand the appeal of it, even if it doesn't necessarily speak to me. Before we move on to the next one, because we are going to be going on for about 2 hours at this point, do you know how many hours roughly you've put into Red Dead?
No. Wow.
I mean, at a guess, is it tens of hours or is it hundreds of hours? Because I could feasibly imagine either.
I would say it's probably around the 100 mark, maybe like 100 to 150, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing with it, is I can completely understand how you could get lost in it for that long. I know my sister's a big fan of Red Dead, and she's been on furlough since the beginning of this pandemic, and she's probably put double hundreds into Red Dead. And I can understand why, as much as it doesn't necessarily speak to me. But sorry, go on.
It was one of those games where I was playing it and I was just, as I normally do, go through it as quick as possible. But then there was just a point where I was just like, no, let's sit back and enjoy this. Let's take my time with it. And, and I was so much happier that I did. And, I experienced things, I went out hunting in the game, which I normally don't do, just because, it's just a bit of a waste. And, I like to give virtual animals a break. I'm not into real hunting, so I shouldn't be into virtual hunting. But, I took my time to take part in the hunting and do that part. And I was, just exploring and just walking around and, take my time doing things. And I just think it's it's a better game if you just get lost in it and you just treat it as a game that you're just going to play it for a long time. Don't think of it, I need to finish this. Just think of it as, I'm just going to play it and live in it. And when I get to the end, I'll get to the end.
Yeah, in many ways, it's a life sim. And, I can appreciate how that can be so intoxicating for some players, even if not necessarily for me. So let's move on to my second, or my fourth. No, my second. Either way. my number 2 game from the previous generation, and it might be a bit of a surprise to you, James. that I have chosen Persona 5.
Wow.
The reason that may be a bit of a surprise to James is because he and I both love Persona 5, and it's one of my favourite games, and it's also one of James's favourite games. But I am very, very close to getting the Platinum Trophy on Persona 5. I have one more achievement to get, and then I've Platinumed it. Unfortunately, the achievement I need is to complete all the Mementos tasks. And there's one I keep missing, and I've replayed Persona 5 I think 4 times now. I think I'm now on my 5th playthrough. And I need to get this one Mementos task that I missed because it came from Mishima, and he sends you a text with it. And if you don't answer the text in like the 24-hour period, it's gone and you can't get it back. So I need to replay the entire thing, do all those tasks, and make sure I hit this one that Mishima sends me. And after
Mishima.
After 5 times of playing this pissing game, I'm so bored of the story and their stupid faces and their stupid city. I'm so frustrated with seeing the same thing and listening to the same story. But as much as I'm frustrated with playing it 5 times, this is not a game built to be played 5 times, and it's completely on me. Persona 5 is, I think, the defining JRPG of the last generation. Now, for me, I think it's going to be, in 10 years' time, it's going to be what teenagers who are, teenagers now, are going to be saying is the game that inspired them to become a journalist or inspired them to become a developer, in the same way that people from our generation will be saying that Final Fantasy VII was the reason I wanted to get into games. Final Fantasy VII was the reason I wanted to become a journalist, become a developer, become a visual artist, whatever it might be. I think Persona 5 is the defining JRPG of this entire generation. And to be fair to me, the numbers back it up. It's the biggest debut in the history of the series outside of Japan. It sold 3 million copies as of late 2019. It's the fastest selling Persona title in history. It's the highest selling game in the Shin Megami Tensei franchise. This was my first Persona experience. It was your first Persona experience. It was the first Persona experience for millions of people in the West. I've then gone on to play Persona 4, which is one of my favourite games, and I think is better than Persona 5. It's led me on to playing a bit of Persona 3. Unfortunately, I've got the PS Vita version, which is crap in comparison to some of the other versions. But I want to go back and play that. I even want to go back and play the original 2 if I can get my hands on decent copies of them. I appreciate that Persona is not going to be for everyone, and we actually had the discussion before we came on to this podcast today, where you were explaining why Persona didn't make your list, because you couldn't hand this to any person in the street and say, if you want to understand why I love video games, go and play Persona 5. For a lot of people, this isn't going to connect with them, but if you do like JRPGs, even if you like RPGs flat out, this is, for me, one of the greatest JRPGs ever made, and definitely the biggest and greatest JRPG of the last generation. Now, I'd be more interested to hear, rather than what I loved about so much about Persona 5, more why it didn't quite make your list. Because I was certain that it would appear on this list, and I mainly picked it because you didn't, because I felt like this couldn't be passed over. So is it just that you don't think that it's got that kind of mass appeal that something like Red Dead does, that it wouldn't appeal to the people who just buy a console for Call of Duty and FIFA? Or is there another reason you decided to opt out of Persona 5 for this list?
No, it is essentially that. I mean, I'm so glad you did pick it, because part of me did want to put it in here. And I did consider it quite a bit, when I was putting Mario in there. I was like, yeah, but shouldn't I just put Persona, because I absolutely bloody adore it, and it is a phenomenal game. But no, it is essentially just that. I mean, I didn't pick it because I don't think that I could just give it to anyone. I mean, there's people, that some of my friends or people I work with who are avid gamers, but I just know that if I said to them, play this, they wouldn't enjoy it. They'd be like, no, what is this? And I just think that there's so many, like the games that I've said, they're all games that you can just give to anyone, and anyone can play them and then go, yeah, this is amazing. I can understand why you adore gaming as much as you do. I think Persona is like a gamer's game, so to say. I think it is for people who are so much in love with that, but no, I agree that it's a phenomenal game. And I mean, even in the small detail, it's kind of like Red Dead with the small details as well. I mean, there's the bit where Makoto and Arn say that they can't meet you today because they're going shopping, and you can actually just go to Shibuya and you can see them, and they're getting some food. I don't know I can't remember what the food is, but they're in the store at the market still buying the food, and you can see them. You can't talk to them, but they're there, and it's just like, that's such a cool detail that you wouldn't have noticed. I only noticed it because I saw it on Reddit. And there's so many other things like that where Persona, like Red Dead, have got so many cool little details, and I think it's such a wonderfully crafted game. But I just think that I couldn't give it to everyone because it's very heavy story, and obviously it is a life sim, and life sims aren't for everyone. I mean, I can't just go to everyone and go, hey, do you want to live out a fantasy as playing as a 17-year-old student? Probably not, because it's not exactly what most people go for in games. Most people will go for, I want some high action, whereas Persona is a lot more of a slow burner. And I think while it's perfect what it does, and I agree that I think it's probably the best JRPG of the generation. I just don't think that it was as widespread enough for me personally. When I create the list, I wanted it to be ones that I could give to anyone. It's much the same reason why Life is Strange isn't on this list, because that's probably one of my favorite games of the generation. I absolutely adore it. It's one of my favorite games of all time, but it's just not got that same general appeal. I love it, and it means a lot to me, but I don't think that everyone else would love it as much. Or there are loads of people who do love it, not everyone will love it.
This is going to be a very controversial question with you, I know. But I don't want to spend too much more time on this because we've got some others that we want to talk about in a second as well. And I know we're running long. But Final Fantasy had, in my opinion, quite a bad generation in the PS4 era. I didn't enjoy Final Fantasy 15. And judging by the Metacritic scores, there was a very mixed review of Final Fantasy 15. Final Fantasy 14, A Realm Reborn, was pretty well received, but mainly because the original Final Fantasy 14 was so abysmal that anything would have been better. Is Persona a possible successor to Final Fantasy's throne if the next Final Fantasy isn't quite as good as Final Fantasy fans are going to be expecting it to be?
This hurts me to make me say this. Yeah, potentially. I mean, as you said, I mean, 15, I enjoyed it very much, but it wasn't as spectacular. I didn't love it as much as I'd hoped. And comparing the two, Persona 5, I think is a much better game, and I think it's much more enjoyable. Same with even Persona 4, I think is better than Final Fantasy 15. 14 has never been my remit anyway. I've never been big on the MMO. So I think it could, and because Persona is just going from strength to strength, and yeah, Final Fantasy seems a bit lacking. Final Fantasy VII was a phenomenal game, the remake, but it had its issues, and they're going places with it which isn't obviously keeping everyone happy. But I think the Final Fantasy VII remake has sparked new faith in what they can do with it, and I think if 16 is like 7, but obviously with its own story, and it goes and has that sort of depth, and just that well-made thing, I think obviously Final Fantasy can stay on, but I think Persona is definitely just as worthy of being like the pinnacle of JRPGs.
Yeah, I'm a bit cheeky asking that question to you as a big Final Fantasy fan, but equally I look at the anime Persona 5 has spawned that has been quite critically acclaimed. I think of the marketability of some of the characters in it. I think of the fact that Joker is also in Smash Bros. That Persona 5 Royal did so well that it's got Persona 5 Scramble, I think it's called, coming out to the West next year. There's still a lot of legs in P5, and it's a very, very popular game. Persona 6 is going to take a while to come out because it's such a bloody difficult franchise to make at the scale of Persona 5 and 4. But I sense perhaps a bit of a changing of the guard, personally. Obviously, we'll have to see what Final Fantasy offers up next, but I think Final Fantasy, for me at least, and from certainly some of the recent mainline entries, for me is starting to creak, and Persona is starting to look very fresh in comparison. But obviously that's all speculation and perhaps a topic for a brand new podcast. In the meantime, we still have 3 more games to get through, so let's move on to your second pick, Destiny.
Oh boy, Destiny. Yeah, I mean, this is probably a bit of a weird one to put in there. And I need to, stress that this is Destiny 1, not Destiny 2, because for reasons, which I'll probably go into. But no, I think Destiny 1 was just a remarkable game. I think it spawned the whole, mini MMO style of game where you have on a console and you have just like a smaller community, and you go to the tower and you've got other people who are playing, and it's like a community. You don't talk to them, you don't interact with them, but you can see them and you can join random people while you're playing strikes. Or if you're in the overworld, you'll just see them doing their thing. You can tag along and do stuff. And what it spawned that whole thing, and you've had so many games since there that have tried a similar formula where you've had like Anthem, or Warframe is another one, which has like that sort of similar style. And there's so many more that have done it, because it's such a cool system, and it just has such a better way of just changing up that sort of the traditional online format for consoles, which had been for so many years just been online matchmaking. Right, let's play a quick game against each other, and then that'll be all I ever see of you. So I think that's done, and similar to how Pokemon Go created communities. Destiny again has been so good at creating communities where people have interacted together, and you form new raid squads together, and you come back and you're like, hey, let's go do the next raid together, and you build friends. I mean, there's people on Destiny that I didn't speak to before Destiny, but now I speak to semi-frequently. Or if there's like new content that comes up, we'll play it together, or even then just reach out to new people. And I've had so many great memories where I've had to do a raid and I've had a Sherpa, and there's been some very patient people who have been able to take me and my friends through raids, and there's nothing that they get out of it. Most of these people have finished the raid already that week, so they've got all the loot, but they're just doing it just to help people in the community who just need that help to go through it. And I think that Destiny 1 was just so good at just building that community spirit. And the one thing that I think Destiny just does so much better than a lot of games is its core gameplay is so smooth and addictive. It's probably one of the best shooters that have they've been made, just because it's so fluid and it just works. I mean, not talking about like the guns that they've made, or the balancing, because they've had a lot of balancing issues. I mean, like the Matador back in Destiny 1, which was ridiculous, or the Mida multi-tool, which was just you had to have it, or the Clever Dragon. But the actual, just the way it shoots is just so perfect. It's the guns feel right. They're smooth. Enemies, sure, it can be tanky, and the bosses, but when you're just fighting the normal enemies, it feels just so satisfying when you kill them. And it's just, everything just feels so perfectly created. The supers feel super fun to use, and they feel like you've actually got power, but they don't feel too overpowered. When you go online in the actual matchmaking, it's addictive. And there's the ranked stuff, trials, which I've never been big for competitive play. I mean, apart from Overwatch, which you mentioned earlier, but I tend to stay away from it because I just enjoy it for fun. But there was something addictive about Destiny shooting that I just wanted to play the competitive, and I would always ask my friends, hey, let's do trials. We would always lose, and they would get angry, but I was just happy because I was just like, this is fun. I'm having fun trying to be the best. I know I'm not, but I'm just having fun doing it, and trying to get those 9 wins in a row. And yeah, that's just essentially why I think it's such a great game, and I'd put Destiny 1 ahead just because I think it spawned the genre, obviously, and it like, obviously they had a difficult development, and they obviously had that whole story U-turn at the start, when like a year before the game was released, they just overhauled the whole story, so the story was all fragmented, and we've all had the memes where it's like, oh, I could tell you, but I don't have the time, which is just, obviously, it's like, no, please tell me. And the reason they couldn't tell you was because they had no story, because they had to U-turn everything. But what they did, I still think it was amazing that they was able to make a story work. And and people have got issues when it first launched with Dinklebot. But I think that he did a great job. I fondly remember Dinklebot because it was just fun. And I remember when Destiny first started, I wasn't a big fan of it, but then I still played it because it was just so addictive. And it's not like any other shooter, it was just addictive. The loot system, which also was made more popular via Destiny, obviously it had been around for quite a while. Destiny obviously made that whole the loot grind a major thing of games, and obviously so many other games have taken it further. I mean, obviously it didn't start with Destiny, but it helped to popularize it. it's just done so much. And again, with like raids as well. Obviously, that started more of other games as well. Like World of Warcraft, I think was probably the first one that introduced raids. But it again made it more popular thing for other genres to explore. I mean, like a first-person shooter that has a raid is such a cool concept, and it just brings the community together again. And you've got people racing to do it. But yeah, as I said, the reason I think Destiny 1 is better than 2 is just because I think 2 they've had that less of a they've had more issues down the line, and they've had difficulty trying to get things right. They've had so many U-turns on what they've been doing during development, and there's been issues with like the content they've added, where I think that the first Destiny just nailed the content that it did do. I mean, they started off rough, but then they released the Taken King, which is probably my favorite DLC that's ever been released, just because it just fixed everything and it just made such a beautiful game. It had so much content that was good and that was enjoyable. It had so much loot to get. And then the Rise of Iron afterwards, again, just added less content, but it still had a lot of content in there to add, which was more fun. Whereas I think Destiny 2, they've struggled to find where they are and to find a system that works after they tried to tweak it around a lot. I mean, they've not even, there's like vendor armor, which hasn't been updated, or Iron Banner armor, which hasn't been updated in 2 years. Whereas obviously with Destiny 1, we was getting new armor every like third, I think it is, or whenever they added new content. But yeah, that was kind of a long thing, but I really love Destiny.
Well, the good thing here is I've not got anything to add really, because I know 3 things about Destiny. I know that it's one of your favourite games, I know that 2 is not very good, and I know that it was basically the birth of the live service game. And you already mentioned games like Anthem. My only real interaction with the live service element was in Marvel's Avengers, which I bought because I wanted to make a video of it, and then put down 60 quid in it and went, Jesus, I've made a big mistake here. But that's essentially all I know about Destiny. Destiny is one of those games that just completely flew under my radar when it came out, and that when I knew about it and when I understood what it was, just never spoke to me. So I never went in for Destiny. But I mean, from in terms of the industrial impact that it's going to have, or the industry impact it's going to have, in terms of establishing that live service element, in terms of the sheer amount of games that have tried to copy it since, that have expanded on it. I've already mentioned earlier with like stuff like Crash Team Racing Nitro Fueled, that would have taken inspiration from stuff like Destiny and stuff like Overwatch, and adding in pointless additional shops and things that you didn't need in the first place. I understand the impact that it's had on the industry, and the impact it's going to continue to have on the industry. In terms of its gameplay, I've never played it, so I can't make a case for or against it in this instance. So I will have to take your word that it's one of the games of the generation. But I was pretty sure you picked Destiny 2 when you first mentioned this to me, which surprised me because I knew Destiny 2 was not particularly well received. Before we move on to the next one, because I've got so little to say about Destiny, in terms of the future of this franchise, do you think there's going to be, I mean, there may have already been announced for all I know because I know nothing about it, but do you think there will be a Destiny 3, or do you think they've reached a point now where they will just continue to update what they already have and try and hold on to the player base they already have?
So they've mentioned their plans at the moment, and it is to just carry on with Destiny 2. There aren't any sort of plans to make Destiny 3 at the moment. They just, they want to keep Destiny 2. Originally, the plan was to have, like, originally back when Destiny started, there was like the idea that it was going to be a 10-year plan. It was going to have Destiny 1. You have a year update. You have another year update, I think, and then you'll have the next game. Then that'll have an update, next game, update. But they've changed that all now, and now it's going to be Destiny 2 is where they are. They just had their latest update, which was live last Tuesday, which showed how they're going to do it, because obviously the game is coming so big. So they've removed some planets, and they've removed some content. They put it into the vault. They've introduced new stuff. So I think, so the idea is that they're just going to keep Destiny 2 going, and as for it to keep going, I don't know. It pains me to see what has happened to Destiny, because I do love it so much, and I love just playing it. I think it's such a cool and wonderful game. But I just think they don't know where they're going. They're making, especially for Destiny 2, they're just making so many U-turns on stuff that they've decided then not decided, and they wanted to have like a constant period of updates where they were just going to keep having updates to make it properly live, so there was rarely any content droughts. But now they're going back to okay, no, we're not going to do that. We're just going to go back for like the more traditional updates, like over a longer period. And yeah, I haven't actually played the new update because I don't want to. I don't want it to be the end where I play it and I'm like, okay, I think I'm done with Destiny because I haven't uninstalled Destiny/Destiny 2 since I first installed it because it's just been such a mainstay. But from what I've seen, they haven't added that much, and it's kind of. Uh, my friend described it the best. He said that he feels perfectly whelmed by it, where it's the sense of it's not great. I'm not like, wow, this is amazing, this is so good, but then it's not terrible. It's just this is fine. Okay, cool. This is okay. I'm not gonna spend hours on it. I'm just okay, yeah, sure. Okay, there's some new stuff, but it's not great. And that's why he loves Destiny even more than I do. So yeah, no, I have some issues, and I really hope they do find a fix for it because, yeah. But then they've got other stuff in the background that they're making, so maybe Destiny will be on its way out. I don't know.
Well, all I know for definite about Destiny's future is that Marvel's Avengers will not be topping it as the best live service game available today. Hopefully, by the way, we can sit down and play Destiny at some point because I now have an Xbox. So maybe maybe that's in our future. Maybe we can do another podcast updating everyone on how much I did or did not like Destiny. So let's move on to our top picks for our games of the generation. Now, my top pick for the game of the generation, you already know what it's going to be. And the strange thing is, as much as I love this game, and as much as I think it is the best game of the generation, I have very little to say on it. And I think you're also going to have very little to say on it since you haven't finished it yet. But obviously, if you know me personally, you know that my game of the generation is Bloodborne. Now, the reason I have little to say on it is simply because I think Bloodborne is one of the best games ever made. And for me, it's the greatest game I've ever played. And for me, completely objectively, it is the greatest game ever made. I think it's perfect by every measure. I think it's one of the most awe-inspiring and enrapturing video game worlds I've ever experienced. I think it looks beautiful from top to bottom, despite the fact that it is one of the most horrific, gory, bloody, disgusting games you will ever play. I think the story is so wonderfully, subtly told. You could play the entire game without any comprehension of the underlying story if you really wanted to. If you read no item descriptions, if you paid no attention to the notes that are scattered around, you could literally just hack and slash your way through the entirety of Bloodborne and know nothing about why you were doing it or why you were there. But if you take the time to unpick things and listen to some of the various cutscenes that are dotted around, they're not particularly long. There's only really one storyline cutscene in Bloodborne. All the rest of it is just what you piece together through your own experiences, through reading the notes, through reading the item descriptions. But I just think that the entire construct of Bloodborne is so incredible. It's for me, like I say, one of the best games ever made. For me personally, it's the best game ever made. I love it, and I think it's certainly a defining action game in the genre. In terms of what it did for From Software, I mean, they obviously made their name off the back of Demon's Souls, and they made their name predominantly off the back of Dark Souls. But I think the thing that separates Bloodborne for me from Dark Souls in particular is that it's a single standalone experience, which I know you can say, well, Demon's Souls is as well. But for me, Bloodborne is so much more distinctive than that, not only because of the artistic style, but because it's so aggressive. Because it's completely the 180 of Dark Souls, where Dark Souls and Demon's Souls, you're having to be a bit more lumbering, you're having to use shields and defend yourself. With Bloodborne, you can pick up a shield, but it's like a wooden shield, and it does you no good to have it with you. You have to be on the offensive all the time. You have to be attacking, you have to be brave, you have to face your fears in Bloodborne, and really take it to a disgusting, awful, blood-stained world. I can't talk high enough of Bloodborne, and I find it really, really difficult to speak about it critically, because I can think of no greater praise for it than it's the greatest game I've ever played. I know you are currently playing Bloodborne, and I know it hasn't gripped you yet. I appreciate you're only 2 bosses in on this current playthrough, but I mean, I've not done a fantastic job of making the case for Bloodborne, aside from the fact that I love it so much. But I mean, just from what you know of it, from the experiences that you've had with it, can you appreciate why it's my favourite game. Can you appreciate why so many people find Bloodborne so intoxicating?
I can, and it was like as you put Persona on yours in, because obviously I didn't put mine on mine. I had a similar thing for Bloodborne, where if you had not put Bloodborne on yours, I'd put it on mine, just because I can't deny that it is probably one of the standout games from the generation, because it is just so perfect. It is a perfect sort of game, and it's, as you mentioned, you can't imagine PS4 without Red Dead, God of War, and Bloodborne is one of them for me, and I'm sure it is for you. But I just think it is just perfectly created, and I never liked the Soulsborne games, just because I'd looked at it and everyone was said, oh my god, nothing's as hard as Dark Souls, and so I was just like, oh, I hate it, and it became like that circle jerk when I was just like, oh my god, this is just so annoying. Like, people are like, oh my god, it's so tough. So I'd always kind of given off on it, but then my friend just put me on Bloodborne for a bit, and I just I fell in love with it, and I thought this is such a cool game. I've been so wrong about the whole franchise, and now later then played Dark Souls just because of Bloodborne, and it was just about Bloodborne. I think it just does what it does so well. Everything's smooth, and it just looks like the scenery is beautiful, and everything connects together. I mean, so I played it. I got up to Rom, which I think was halfway last year, before other things caught my attention, just because they were less stressful, pretty much. But going back through it now, and I'm taking more time to just appreciate the scenery, and I know where things go now, so I'm less lost. But you can just see the whole map, and this is something that Dark Souls and Demon Souls are known for, is the fact that all the maps connect up and they're so well made. But the fact that you can just stand up on the bridge where you fight the cleric beast, and then you can look down, you can go, oh, I was just there a minute ago. That's so cool, and you can see the enemies that are down there. Or you can just carry on for another 5 minutes, and then you're down in the sewers, but you look up and you're like, oh shit, that's the bridge I was literally just on. I think that's such a cool way of making a game feel so enclosed, and everything feels like it's been made with a place and a purpose, and there's nothing that's just extra. There's no just added bits where it's just, we needed something to go here, so here's this. Everything feels so good. Everything's so bleak and macabre. It's very obviously it's very Lovecraftian style of like beast and eldritch terrors, and I just think it works so well in the stories that you meet and these people that you meet. There's like that girl at the start who's looking for who's lost her mum and her dad, and that's such a sad, tragic story. Or there's other people that you meet, and you've got the ones like who are sad, and you're like, oh, I feel really sorry for these. But then you've got the people who are equally crazy or are assholes, and you're like, screw you. And it, for not having a lot in it, it does do so well at building that intrigue, and the fact that the lore of games that don't put lore in the game, I do have a love-hate relationship. I mean, Overwatch, I mentioned that I loved it. Destiny did a similar thing with their lore externally in the Grimoire, and I didn't like it because I thought it was just too much and too hard to access. Whereas I think Bloodborne is another one that does it so well. I mean, it's tough to get it, and if you look for it, that's fine, but it can be tough to find it. But it's built up such a world where you want to find it, and you want to know what's happened, because it's so crazy, it's so messed up, and you're just like, I want to know what's happened. I want to know why they're doing this. I want to find the intricacies. I want to find out, who is Father Gascoigne? Why is he so important? What's his backstory? Why have I just started to fight him? Or some of the other characters that you meet. And I think that's just such a wonderfully made thing. And I think the trick weapons are phenomenal, and I don't know why other games haven't had a similar thing. I just think it's such a cool concept of having a weapon that can switch in two. I mean, my favorite's the sword blade, but the first one I ever tried was the cane. I don't know what its name is, where you can have a cane and then you switch it and then it's a whip. And I'm like, this is such a cool gimmick that is so well implemented that it's not just like a normal gimmick where it's like, hey, they can switch into two, and they actually work in the combat, and you can use it to do more powerful and quicker attacks and stuff by switching between the forms. I think it is a great game, and it's not going to be my favorite game ever. Even though I don't know, I haven't finished it yet, but I can sense it probably won't be. But I can understand what its impact is, and I do think it is a standout game. So,
I mean, what I would say with Bloodborne is that when I finished it, I actually was planning my top 25 favorite games at the time, in preparation for a video list I did the back end of last year. When I finished Bloodborne, I knew it had to feature on there somewhere, but I put it at 17th originally because I thought that was a phenomenal game, but I don't know if I'll replay that. And then it just stuck with me over the next couple of days. I think you and I both had the same thing with Persona 5 as well, in that we could just hear bits of music from Persona 5 in the real world while we were walking around after we finished it. Yeah. And you came home and you put on a different game and it felt weird to not be in the world of Persona 5 after so long in it. It was the exact same thing for me with Bloodborne. I was actually watching a Eurogamer episode of Late to the Party the other day, and it was either Fable 1 or Fable 2, I can't remember which one now. But Zoe was asking Aoife about the sound effects from video games that, are there any defining ones that Aoife has in her mind that she can just hear that are kind of with her in her day-to-day life. And I was thinking about it for myself, and my honest answer is the creaking of wood underfoot in Bloodborne. When you're running across like up a wooden staircase, that wooden creak, I can hear it in my head now, as clear as a bell. For me, it's one of the most defining video game sound effects that I will ever encounter. I don't know how much more I can say about this critically, because I just think it's perfect. I can't see it in any other light other than the best game ever made. So I don't know how much more I can say about it without just sounding redundant. But for me, like I've said this, so far in this podcast as well, with God of War, with Red Dead, I can't picture the PS4 without Bloodborne. And I know so many people that have played it that have come away from it saying that it was their favourite game as well. I know it's not going to be for everyone. I know the difficulty is going to be too much for some people. I know the gore and the horror is going to be too much for some people. But honestly, if you're listening to this and you have any concerns about whether or not Bloodborne is for you, give the trailer a watch, or watch the first 10 minutes of a Let's Play or something. And if you think, God, that looks interesting, then go and play it. Just go and play it, because it's for me, it's just the best game of the generation, and I don't know what higher praise I can give it outside of, I think it's the best game ever made, the best game I've ever played. Of course, you have your own opinion on what the best game of the generation was. It's one that we will definitely disagree on, because I really did not get on with this when I played it. But it is, of course, undoubtedly one of the biggest releases of this generation, one that I'm sure people have been sat patiently waiting for throughout this entire podcast, and it is, of course, Breath of the Wild.
It is one of the best games ever made. The end. I absolutely adored this game. I think it's spectacular, and everything they created is just beautiful. I think it's always tough to talk about one of your the games that you adore so much and put it into words like you just mentioned with Bloodborne, because you do just love it. But I'm a Zelda boy through and through. Obviously it's probably my favorite franchise. But I think anyone can play Breath of the Wild and just be taken back by what it does, because it just is so it's so beautiful. I mean, the visuals are stunning. I love the art style that they've gone for it. I love the freedom that you've got. And one of my favorite things of the game is the fact that things just work. And you wouldn't even think it. Well, you would think it, but like you wouldn't imagine it being workable. You wouldn't go, this will work. You normally just do it in games and going, this probably isn't going to work, but I'll do it anyway. And then you do it and it works. And I remember, just coming across it when I was just running around, and I got struck by lightning because I was wearing metal. I had my swords on, and I was like, holy shit, that's crazy. And then obviously you can use that to fight enemies. Obviously, if you've got the lightning coming on your sword, you could throw your sword at an enemy, and then that will kill the enemy if the lightning strikes them. Or the fact that if you go to the volcanic area, if you're in your normal clothes, because obviously it's a volcano, it's feckin' hot. So obviously you're going to start dying, which is like it in the original games. But I mean, it just does it such a perfect standard. And the fact that if you drop food in the volcanic area, the food then cooks because it is so gosh darn hot. And there's just so many little tidbits of it where it just works. And the stuff that I've after finishing it, and I've seen stuff and people do stuff, I'm like, I did not know you could do that. Like the octo balloons. I didn't know that you could attach them to make them float up. And I mean, it's obvious, because I mean, I think some kind of suggests it in the description, but I just never tried it. I never thought, this will make things fly. And the freedom that it gives you is just phenomenal. Obviously, Zelda's has been a stickler to system, and they tried to get away from it. I mean, there was the Spirit Tracks Link Between Worlds, where they tried to rejig the item format and go, oh, you can get the items whenever you want them. You just rent them, and then so that offered more freedom of what temples you do, what order or what items that you need, but it didn't really work it as well. And whereas Breath of the Wild truly made you just complete the game whatever way you wanted. You could just spend 400 hours just exploring, doing whatever you wanted, come across the temple-esque beasts whenever you wanted to, and you could do it in whatever order you wanted to. You could do the shrines in whatever you wanted to. You could just get lost in the side quests. I mean, my favorite side quest was just helping to build a village, which is just such a cool aspect that I didn't expect to be in a Zelda game. But yeah, I just think that it's stunning, it's remarkable, and kind of like what I said with Red Dead, it showed the scale of what you can do. I think Zelda does it so much more, and it just shows that this is what games can be, because it does feel like it just does everything that you could think of and that you would want. And yeah, I think it's remarkable. I know you did not think that though.
Well, here's the thing. I know a lot of people that think Breath of the Wild is a 10 out of 10. I think it's an 8 out of 10. And because I think it's an 8 out of 10, it sounds blasphemous, because everyone that played it loved Breath of the Wild and thinks it's one of the best, if not the best entry in the Zelda series. For me, I think it's a very, very good game and one of the best of the generation. But for me, I'd put it somewhere around an 8 out of 10, because I had issues with weapon degradation for a start. As I've already mentioned with Red Dead, I find games like this that are open world and there's so much to do and so many places to go, I find them very, very overbearing. I really struggle with them because it just kind of gives me too much to do, and I don't know where I should be focusing or what I should be doing, or have I got a measurement of how I'm progressing. I don't want to have to think about, man, if I'm wearing metal during this thunderstorm, I'm going to get hit by lightning. For me, that's too much detail in a game. But the flip side is, for people like you, it's precisely the right amount of detail in a game, because why wouldn't lightning strike you if you were coated in metal in a field full of no metal? Why wouldn't it be that if you go to the top of a snowy peak and you're basically in no overalls, and if you're in no clothes, that you freeze to death? Why would these things not? Why would these things not be true to life in this world? I can completely understand, in the same way as I can with Red Dead, how fantastic this is as an open world game. The thing that I appreciate the most about Breath of the Wild, though, as a long-time Pokemon fan that is desperate to see the Pokemon franchise do something more with the world they've got, I'm so impressed that Nintendo did what they did with Breath of the Wild and basically said, everything that we've done with this franchise, we're going to park, we're going to take the best bits out of it, and we're going to create a brand new Zelda experience. To have a Zelda sandbox, which is basically what Breath of the Wild is, like you say, this sheer amount of experimentation and creativity that's available in that game, with throwing swords at enemies and getting them struck by lightning, with those balloons that can help you fly across the ocean or up to high peaks or just across the land if you need to get there in a quicker way. The sheer amount of experimentation, the sheer amount of places you can go. I would kill for a Pokemon game that was created with the same love, care, and attention as Breath of the Wild. And if I was a long-time fan of the Zelda franchise, then I'm sure I would have loved Breath of the Wild as an opportunity to experience this series and these characters in a way that I never would have before and could never have imagined experiencing like this before. I had my own issues with it as a game to sit down after a long day of work and enjoy. For me, it's just not that. But like I say, for me, it's still an 8 out of 10, even if it's not a perfect 10 out of 10. And for people who are big fans of this game, that's the worst praise I could ever give it. But I mean, for me, it is the defining game of this generation. Not only because of the scale of it, because of everything that it did, but also because just for the fans of that franchise, it's the shining example now for so many other fans of so many other franchises that, like Pokemon fans, when Sword and Shield come out, I think, well, why isn't it more like Breath of the Wild? Why haven't they done the same thing that Breath of the Wild did for the Zelda franchise? There'll be fans of so many other franchises that will look at a tired old format, even like Call of Duty. If you're a long-time Call of Duty fan, and every generation or every new game is basically the same thing, I'm sure there's contingents of Call of Duty fans that are thinking, man, why couldn't Treyarch or whoever it is that's developing the next one, why can't they have done something like Nintendo did with Breath of the Wild? Why couldn't they find a new way of giving me a Call of Duty experience? Or why can't they find a new way of giving me a Pokemon experience? Or whatever it might be. I can completely understand why this is so loved, and I do agree that it is probably the game of the generation. I can't think of a single game that was bigger than this, that meant as much as this. There was games that appealed to me more, but I think just in terms of the industry as a whole, the console that it launched on, this is almost undoubtedly the game of the generation, irrespective of what I thought of it.
Yeah, no, I think it's shown that a game that is what 25 years old, I want to say, it can still reinvent itself and can do new things, but without making it feel like it's completely new, and it's not, kept true to its essence of what it is. And it is very much more similar to maybe what they thought of near the start, because obviously the first Zelda was a bit more open and free to you to go and do bits when you wanted, sort of aspect. But I can see your issues with the Pokemon, because that wild area really felt like it could have just been put. I mean, if you put Pokemon in the Breath of the Wild map, it would work perfectly still. I mean, you could. I feel like Breath of the Wild's map would work for pretty much any game. I mean, you could put a Mario game in there and it'd still work. But no, I think one of the good things about Breath of the Wild is just that aspect of that you couldn't go anywhere. I mean, you see a mountain over there, you can climb it, and not like in Skyrim where you kind of got to jimmy a horse up there. It physically you just climb it yourself, and that stamina bar is just such a cool aspect. And the fact it's one of the first games where I've had that sensation where I'm just looking like I'm gonna go there, and I know that I can actually just go there and I can climb it. And I just think it feels like it's the map of its size. I think it's so wonderfully. And there's so many times where you just stop, where you're just breathtaking. I mean, the intro where you come out of the cave and you just look out, and I got goosebumps where it was just looking into that scenery, because it's just. I mean, obviously, it's not the most realistic graphics. It's very cartoony, and that's its style. But it just still looks so beautiful, and it's just stunning. And yeah, I just think that it's inspired a lot of games. I mean, there's Genshin Impact, which is that free to play, which is heavily similar to Breath of the Wild. I mean, I'm not going to say that, because Genshin Impact is still a good game and it's still got a lot going for it, which it deserves on its own merits. But it's got that same sort of aspect, and I do think that we're going to see some more games that come with that Breath of the Wild style, because it did shake up the industry a lot, and it did show, that there's a lot of room for games where you've got freedom to go do what you want and just explore and have fun. I mean, as I said with other games, you can just get lost in there and just have fun and just explore to your heart's content, and anything that you can think of, you can probably do it. And I just think that it's such a beautiful thing to be able to do, and just trying to find those little unique bits is just such a charm. It's got a lot of charm. I mean, it's so charming, and it's not only charming, but it's revolutionized a lot of the industry.
Yeah, I think the best things you can say about any game are that it's a game that would have sold consoles by itself, and that it's a game that, again, in 10 years' time, the next generation of games journalists or games developers are going to say, I got into this industry, I fell in love with this art form because of Breath of the Wild. So, the issues that I've got with it notwithstanding, I cannot argue that this is almost undoubtedly the game of the generation. It's a defining experience for a lot of people. It's going to be a defining experience for a lot of people going forward. And yeah, as a long-term Pokemon fan, I can only look at it with a great deal of envy, and I can't imagine how much it must have meant to you to have first played Breath of the Wild as a long-term Zelda fan, to have got something that good, that different, that unique, that still felt like it was honouring everything that came before it and pushing it all further forward at the same time. I would kill for an experience like that with Pokemon and so many other. I mean, even like Spider-Man. I'm a big long-term Spider-Man fan, and until the PS4 game came around, I'd never had an experience like that, and I was desperate for it, having seen the Arkham series do that for Batman. I'd kill for something like that with the Pokemon series as well, and I am very envious of a lot of Zelda fans for having that experience with Breath of the Wild.
Yeah, no. The one that I'm looking forward to is Breath of the Wild 2. Well, it depends what they do, and what my hope is that they have evolved the map so that you've got civilizations like building on it, and so that you've got cities that weren't in the original one being built, or they've had some changes to the environment. I don't know, maybe they've got like flashback periods as well, where you go back in, I don't know, where it's like a time thing as well, and you can see the map before Calamity Ganon's attack. And I don't know, I feel Gammon, the big deadly pig. I want to say pig. I think gammon comes from pig.
Yes, gammon comes from pig.
I'm vegetarian. I don't know these things. But yeah, I think that'd be such a cool way of doing it, and I think that that it'd be such a cool spread across the two. Just seeing the time grow between them, I think it's going to be such a cool concept. But yeah, no, I think Breath of the Wild 2 is gonna have been is the main one when I've thought about this list. It's the one that I knew instantly, because I think it has meant so much for the industry, and it's just a standout top thing that's really shaken things up and shaped new life.
Yeah, I mean, my gut instinct is, although we don't know everything that's going to be coming out in the next 10 years clearly, but when we look back on the PS5, Xbox Series X, Nintendo Switch generation, and whichever console the Nintendo decide to bring out next, my gut feeling is that Breath of the Wild 2 will probably be on that list as well for best games of the generation. It's just got that feel now. They did so well with the original that I don't see how they can cock it up the second time around. So, many congratulations to anyone that has been here with us for the entire nearly 2 hours of this podcast. That's certainly an hour longer than I thought this was going to run. But then again, these are 5 of our games of the generation. Clearly passionate topics that we had a lot to talk about. So I'd be fascinated to hear some of the ones that we missed out that you would perhaps like to have mentioned as games of the generation. Clearly, like I said at the top of this podcast, games like Rocket League, games like The Last of Us 2. There's so many we could mention that we obviously didn't get around to. But yeah, I mean, there's arguments that can be made for a lot of games. So if your favourite wasn't mentioned here, then I can only apologise. But by all means, do send out in the comments and let us know why your pick should have been mentioned here today, or provide the case for it. James, it's been a pleasure as ever. I have no idea when we'll next sit down to do a podcast, because I know you have a move coming up in the next couple of weeks. Then it's obviously Christmas, and I'll be getting used to the new generation, and you'll be patiently waiting for your Viva Pinata Xbox. So we will convene for another podcast at some point in the future. But a pleasure as ever.
Yeah, thank you, and pleasure to you too.
And thank you to anyone who may or may not be listening. Certainly to the ones who are listening, not so much to the ones who aren't. And we will see you again whenever we next sit down to do a podcast. Hopefully, it will not be nearly 6 weeks. So thank you very much for listening, and we shall see you next time.